When you look at Carnival Cruise Line today, you see vacation, entertainment, luxury, and escape. But before these ships were party boats, before they were floating hotels, they served a very different purpose. See, Carnival's earliest vessels, they weren't new. They weren't designed for tourists either. I recently found out that they were old, decommissioned European liners, ships that once moved troops, resources, migrants, and colonial power across the Atlantic. Carnival wasn't the only one either. Almost every major cruise line began with ships that used to serve empires because maritime routes weren't just about travel, they were the backbone of empire. Now, let's talk about the industry or the empire behind the cruise industry. So, before there were cruise ships, there were imperial ships. White Star Line, Connard, Connard Line, I think I pronounced that correct. Correct. Holland America, Royal Mail Ship. These four companies weren't built for leisure. They were built for global control, moving soldiers, transporting goods, extracting resources, and shipping wealth from colonized lands directly into European ports. When jets replaced sea travel in the 1960s, these old imperial vessels were sold really cheap and transformed into cruise ships. The cruise industry is literally built on the bones of old empires. But here's where it gets a little deeper and kind of creepy because in Western historical language, empire quietly means white empire. Everyone else erased, downgraded, or reclassified. But not because they lack power, but because acknowledging their power breaks the whole colonial narrative. Let me show you how deep this manipulation actually runs. Let's talk about some of the empires that they erased. Africa didn't have tribes. Africa didn't have scattered kingdoms. Africa didn't have primitive societies. Africa had empires, real ones, global ones, and they were just so happened to be sophisticated ones. See, the Ethiopian Empire, yeah, it was over 300 years old. The Mali Empire, richest empire in world history. Songhai Empire, military and academic powerhouse. The Benin Empire, advanced urban design and bronze mastery. The Congo Empire, centralized government and diplomacy. The Zulu Kingdom, functionally an empire intentionally downplayed. These weren't footnotes, they were world powers. But Western historians avoid calling them empires because it destroys the myth of European superiority. It exposes Africa's pre colonial advancement and it reveals Europe feared Africa. And it threatens biblical and royal narratives they tried to appropriate. This is historical censorship on purpose. So, while America was being reshaped, a global Black awakening was rising. Marcus Garvey was at the center of it. Now, not talking about quality, not begging for acceptance, not asking for a seat at somebody's table. Garvey was talking about economics, power, maritime control, and nationhood. He understood one truth: a people who cannot control their own commerce will forever be controlled by someone else's empire. That's why Garvey created the Black Star Line, not just a shipping company, but a symbol of sovereignty, a direct counter move to the White Star Line and the maritime power system that fueled colonization. See, Garvey wasn't trying to fix the system, he was trying to replace it. So, why did Garvey look to Ethiopia, one of the biggest empires that European powers wanted to erase? And here's where people miss the revelation. Garvey didn't choose Ethiopia by emotion. He chose Ethiopia because it represented the one thing Western powers could never conquer: an African empire that stayed sovereign, stayed royal, stayed spiritually rooted, and stayed undefeated. Ethiopia wasn't symbol, it was blueprint, it was prophecy, and it was legitimacy. To reconnect Black people with Ethiopia was to reconnect them with empire, royal lineage, ancient sovereignty, biblical identity, and global power. Garvey understood something very profound. Reconnecting to Ethiopia breaks the spell of colonial history. That terrified the West more than the Black Star Line ever could. So, bringing it all together, when we say maritime routes weren't just the backbones of empire, they were the backbone of their empire. This is what we mean. Africa had empires as well, strong ones, wealthy ones, and civilized ones. But history erased them from the category, not because they were weak, they erased them from the category, but because they were proof that African power didn't begin with slavery. It began with empire. Marcus Garvey knew that. The cruise industry origins reveal it. And today, the truth is resurfacing. Today, the truth is resurfacing.